Despite what White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said this afternoon, Vladimir Putin has so far refused to commit to meeting with the leader of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. In fact, today, the Kremlin pushed back on that prospect, saying that Putin and Trump discussed the mere possibility of a meeting between, quote, higher-ranking officials from Ukraine and Russia, making no mention of whether Putin himself would participate. However, Russia throwing cold water on Trump's attempts to organize a meeting has not stopped the White House from reportedly eyeing the Hungarian capital of Budapest to be the location for a trilateral meeting between Trump, Putin, and Zelensky, which is an interesting choice given the fact that Hungary is led by authoritarian Viktor Orban, who has very close ties to Putin and Trump. We did learn today that Trump spoke on the phone with Orban yesterday, and while the White House would not say what they discussed, it's hard to imagine that Russia and Ukraine didn't come up. Now, if the next stage of peace talks were to happen in Budapest, that would certainly add a new layer of symbolism to this entire matter, because Budapest was the site of a 1994 international agreement called the Budapest Memorandum, during which the U.S., the United Kingdom, Russia and France promised to uphold Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and respect for its border in exchange for relinquishing its nuclear weapons. We all know how that peace agreement worked out for Ukraine. Joining us now is the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine under President Obama, Bill Taylor. Bill, welcome back to the show. You've seen a lot of things in the diplomatic world. I have to say, everything that's gone on since Friday, the unusual meeting inviting Vladimir Putin to America. It didn't go as long as it was supposed to go, with an unclear outcome. Then an invitation to Vladimir Zelensky to come to the White House, who then brought all his European friends, the head of NATO, the head of the EU, and a number of prime ministers from Europe. Whole thing has unfolded very unusually. Where do you evaluate us as being right now?
So, Ali, a lot of movement. But I would say that the yesterday conversation actually moved forward a bit in that, as you just pointed out, the Europeans are solid. Europeans are united. And by Europeans, I mean Europeans, including Zelensky. And there was a lot of agreement with President Trump yesterday. So the West, solid, united in support of Ukraine. That's a good thing. Second big thing from yesterday was a whole lot of serious talk about a security guarantee. There's been previous discussions, and the Europeans have been talking about it for some time, but now they're serious, and now they're talking about putting troops on the ground in Ukraine to monitor a ceasefire, not to monitor, to enforce a ceasefire, to deter Russians from coming in and invading again. And President Trump said the Americans will participate, probably from the air, without boots on the ground. But that's an important piece. So those two things actually are a good thing from yesterday.
Back in October of 2024, you wrote in the New York Times that Ukraine should be given NATO membership. Now, NATO's got a lot of things. Being a NATO member involves a lot of things. But the best thing you get in exchange for being a part of NATO is Article 5, the security guarantee, that if anybody attacks you, it's like attacking all the other NATO members, and you get to benefit from that. Ukraine has actually done a lot of NATO-ish stuff, right, since 1994. Their army operates more like NATO armies, militaries operate. They've got that interoperability. So tell me about what NATO, without being in NATO, would look like for Ukraine, the security guarantee that everybody's talking about that doesn't necessarily at the moment involve NATO membership. What does that even look like?
Well, so a step down from NATO membership, which, as you point out, Ali, is the gold standard. It's also the cheapest and the most effective security guarantee that there is. But if that's not on the table for now, don't give up on it, but it's not on the table for now. Then this coalition of the willing, putting troops on the ground with an Article 5-like commitment. That is, this coalition of willing, which is led by the French and the Brits, but it's got like 30 members, 30 nations that are there, including now the Americans, would say that NATO, it says, if you're attacked, we're with you. We'll support you. Doesn't say exactly how we're with you, and each of those 30 nations will do it a little differently, as it is in NATO, as in the actual Article 5.
So tell me then why Vladimir Putin, who amongst his very few flimsy reasons for starting this war, this was one of them, right? That NATO is an encroachment on Russia, always has been ever since those Warsaw Pact countries became NATO countries. Why would Vladimir Putin agree to a NATO light sort of version for Ukraine?
He wouldn't, and it shouldn't matter. It doesn't matter what he thinks about the security guarantee. He doesn't have anything to say about the security guarantee that we or the Brits or the French, Europeans give to Ukraine. That's a matter of Ukraine and those security guaranteeing nations. Putin has nothing to say about that. He has no relevance in that decision. So we shouldn't even ask him if he approves of this. It's the whole purpose, Ali, is to deter Russia from invading Ukraine again. Why would we ask Russia if it's okay with them to deter them? No. We will not. We should not even be talking to the Russians about the security guarantee.
Talk to me about this concept Donald Trump keeps bringing up of a land swap. And obviously, Putin brought that up. You know, a lot of people who say, what's the swap? This was Ukrainian land that Russia took, making references back to 1938 and Germany, which, by the way, 2 or 3 times kept on saying, this is all we want. Once you give us this, we're good. And within a year, you had all of Europe in war. There are some who say there is no amount of swap or giving up land up that is worth it for Ukraine and Europe. And there are others who say there will be no deal unless Ukraine cedes some of the territory that it claims as its own. Where do you stand on this?
I stand on the principle that we should not allow, no one should allow one nation to take by force other nations' territory. We shouldn't allow borders to be changed by force. Now, we can still acknowledge, Ali, that the Russians are in Ukraine. They occupy 19% of Ukraine. That's a fact. So de facto, they're there. But we should never recognize, and the Ukrainians will never recognize, a legal claim of the Russians on that 19%. That's a distinction that we ought to really be emphasizing. Yeah, they're there. We assume they won't be there forever. And we will recognize that, and we won't take it back by force. Ali, remember, you've done good analogies, historical analogies. The West Germans never gave up expectation that they would get back East Germany, even though the Soviets dominated East Germany. And the West Germans, going back to your NATO question, the West Germans gave a commitment, made a promise that they would not try to take East Germany by force. And that would allow them to go into NATO. And they went into NATO, started the EU. The Ukrainians remember that. The Ukrainians will say, okay, like East Germany, we're not going to give up claim to Donbass and Crimea, but we'll get it back someday. We'll get it back someday. And for now, we commit not to try to take it back by force.
Bill, always great to have your analysis. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Former United States Ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor.